So I'm delighted to introduce our second keynote speaker, Hugh Davies from the University of Southampton. The talk is titled How the Web Changes the Way We Learn. And I've been advised that we're going to consider the questions, has technology changed the way we go about learning and what we actually need to learn? And it will also address the question of what 21st century higher education might look like. And I'm dying to know what the answer to that question is. Hugh is Professor of Learning Technologies at the University of Southampton, where he's also Director of Education and directs the Institute for Learning, Innovation and Development. Hugh has a long history of research in hypertext and in learning technologies with over 200 publications in these areas and more than 35 grants. He also has significant experience as an educational change agent in higher education at both a local and a national level. His current interests include the virtual university, using educational analytics to understand how students go about learning, and how the web changes higher education and learning, all of which are branches of web science. Hugh has given a number of recent keynote talks on so-called disruptions in higher education, and in particular in online learning, MOOCs, and the changes that they can cause. Hugh, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. So what's the web given us? I'm going to go right back to the beginning because I go that far back. So 1990, we got the invention of the read-only web. Tim Berners-Lee gave us the ability. Well, in fact, it wasn't meant to be the read-only web, those of us who were around at the time. It's just that no one ever implemented the bit that actually put stuff back again. So Tim Berners-Lee was always going to effectively have something that was rather like a wiki that you could read and write to, except no one implemented write. So we got the read-only web, we had email at the time. It was very difficult to put stuff onto the web at that point, but it was possible to make content available. It was typically the case at that stage that if you made content available on the web, it was to the world, because it's a world wide web and there was no way of stopping it going to everyone. That had some problems. But I'll show you later that at Southampton we started doing that, and we started putting all of our teaching materials online and available to the world at that point. But around 1998-ish, VLEs started to catch on. By 2000, I think Blackboard was going, and so on. And these VLEs were about providing teachers with an easy way of uploading stuff and putting it onto the web, with an easy way of formatting it. They were organized around modules, which was a nice, easy thing. So it was all organized around your module and the people who were taking your module. So that was all nice and easy. And by the way, you had to log in to get into it, which was exactly the opposite of what you had to do with the World Wide Web. Because you logged in, you could be given access to only the bits that people wanted you to get. So now we had the ability for reasonably naive teachers to be able to put stuff up on the web and to make sure that only the people they wanted to see it could see it, i.e. the people who were in their class typically. And we're still at that situation in Southampton in one way at the moment. We have Blackboard as our VLE, and the only people who can see anything in the VLE are the people who are taking that module, unless the teacher makes a specific effort to untick a box and make it available to a larger audience, which doesn't often happen. So we end up with this kind of secret class going on the web in Blackboard. And around 2000, just to remind you of your history, it was about 2000 that we got broadband ISPs, so BT Internet became available in the house. It wasn't until then that anyone else could get onto the internet. You had to be at a university or one of the few companies that actually had internet access. 2005 is generally regarded as being the time that Web 2 happened, and we got the read-write web. and along with it, a lot of other things that we're now much more familiar with, like the social web, crowdsourcing, co-creation, long tail, and folksonomy, and all of these things that O'Reilly declared were what the Web 2 was all about. And at that stage, we see that the size of the web has got enormously larger. And this is largely, I guess, due to the ability for people to get on from home via their BT broadband or whatever they've got at home. 2007 was the date of the first iPhone. Really, I'm using that as a marker for the beginning of mobile internet. I seem to remember struggling with various other devices beforehand that sometimes connected and sometimes didn't. But I do remember Neil Barr here at one conference, one workshop we were at, proudly taking a mobile phone out of his pocket and actually managing to download the file that we couldn't get that we needed via GPRS or whatever. And that was a first. I think that must have been about 2003 or something, a long time ago. And then we get to 2010, and this is a really important point here. It's about 2010, 2014 that we start to see kind of reliable streaming video. I know YouTube had been around a little bit longer than that, but you couldn't really reliably stream video before the last few years. And that's become an important point, hasn't it? Because the timing of MOOCs has been the same as the timing of reliable streaming video. And ubiquitous internet access has become available I just went on holiday, I went camping, and nearly every campsite I went on had internet availability on the campsite. There was almost no point at which my phone wasn't getting me a pretty reliable 3G symbol, and I'm talking about going all the way around Europe. It has now become pretty ubiquitous. So that's what happened. That's what the web gave us. What has happened to teaching? Well, a little bit of, oh yes, I've got to do this one, haven't I? So the way that the teaching has changed, of course, so we had this old theoretical model that we poured knowledge in, and now, of course, the new answer is the computer pours knowledge in. No. But I'd like to, we made the mistake of thinking that was pretty much what happened to start with. I got this from going back to the Wayback Web. This is 1994. This is the page of my module the page of the course that I was course leader of at the time. It was, I think, one of the first online courses in the UK. And we were giving it, it was the modular MSc in information engineering, and people could come along and take modules, and they got 2 days of teaching on campus, and then they went away and did all the rest on the internet. Most of the people on this course were from IBM, as it happened, because we lived quite near IBM Hursley, and IBM Hursley were getting quite worried about their failure to understand what the internet was. And indeed, they understood the internet so little that we found that none of their employees knew what it was or how to get onto it. And I spent an enjoyable period trying to persuade IBM to let me put the internet onto their site, which I lost. They wouldn't have the internet on their site. And in the end, we managed to put a few terminals into their social club. And so people who wanted to do this course had to go down and have a glass of beer and do their coursework online in the social club. Around that time, we got lots of lovely experimentation happening in technology and education. I remember kind of going to conferences at that time, and they were full of what I did with my computer in the holidays. Particularly, it was what I did with my Mac. The new Mac had just come out, and people were playing with that lots. And we got hypertext and so on. So, people started experimenting with what you could do by getting people to create stuff, to do blogs, to use virtual worlds of some kind or another. This thing on the right, not going to work, yeah. This thing here is, back. This thing here is a bit of work we did on STOMP, software teaching of modular physics. And we built all sorts of hypertext stuff around modular physics, and people were able to do online experiments and so on. actually pre-web. This was using a system called hypertext, microcosm, that we built at Southampton. And this was Surrey University who put this together along with a number of other partners. One of the interesting things that happened for us at that stage is we were doing a lot of these sort of creating hypertexts and so on for learning, and we noticed, not surprising I suppose now when you think about it, that the people who learned more were not the students who used the software, but the people who, the graduate teaching assistants and other students that we got to help us put the software together in the first place. They were the ones who'd really learned stuff. And it led us to thinking, well, if putting stuff together helps people to learn, maybe we should make that the teaching method. And we came up with this version of resource-based learning, where we basically bundled loads of resource on a particular topic into a bundle, gave it to the students and said, build a hypertext, build us a story around these resources. And that would be, it was that building action, the constructivist approach, that actually led them to learning. So that was interesting. One of the things the web gave us at this point was the ability for much more authenticity. So these diagrams are just meant to be pictures of real data being used in educational settings. You don't have to play with toy data anymore. You don't have to play with toy tools. You can actually give them the real tool and the real data and tell them to work things out for themselves. And also you can make simulate. One of those is about water basin drainage. What happens when lots of water goes into a water basin and how can you control it and get rid of it. Another of those is about the census. So we got a lot of lovely census data, and you can do really powerful stuff with the census data with the right tools. So geographers loved that. And then kind of around, we were starting to do all this lovely stuff, and then we got to this point where we said, we'll get everything online now. Everything that is needed for teaching will go online, and we'll put it in this lovely thing called a VLE. And we did curriculum mapping, controlled access, communication, tutor support. Everything would all be in the VLE. And now we were really in control, weren't we? And this was about as far from the sort of teaching we do in our classrooms, I think, as is possible. Just putting content into the VLE and saying, look at this, look at this, look at this, do what I tell you here, here, here. It wasn't really what we wanted. What we actually wanted was students to learn independently how to learn. Well, once they leave our university, they're not going to have the VLE anymore. They're going to have to use the real tools and do real things. So, yes, another aspect was communication. Initially, the communication channel we had was teacher to learner, learner to teacher. And then learners started to communicate with each other, not just by email, but by things like Facebook and so on. And they started to get independent of us, and we lost our control. And then, in the ideal place, learners start to communicate with the outside world and find out stuff from outside of our teaching VLE. Excuse me. But one of the things I alluded to earlier has been the importance of ubiquity and speed, because as we see, what have we got here? This one is just showing the increase in bandwidth over the years. This one is showing the different sorts of access to the internet here. And this is showing the fact that actually mobile access to the internet has just overtaken any other form of access to the internet as the most frequent accesses. So these things are really important in terms of what we are able to do now that we weren't able to even consider doing a few years ago. Another thing that we have recently started doing, of course, is tracking our learners. Once we've got them in our VLE, we can start tracking them, and we can find out what they're doing. And this has led to some interesting results. In particular, we start to find, which learners are actually accessing all the materials we've been giving them, which are not, and we can relate that to how successful they are. And we can find out what behaviours seem to lead to successful students, and so on. I've had some very interesting results with just gamification, actually. In fact, is that my next slide? Yeah. Whereby we put some leaderboards up, just saying, these are the students that have most frequently accessed the learning resources and things like that. And you would think this is trivial sort of stuff, but it turns out that the students that access the learning resources most often, and in fact even the students that log in most often, or even most crudely, the students that click in Blackboard most often, actually turn out to do best as well. Now, it's maybe not a causal sort of thing. It may not be because they have clicked in Blackboard they've done well, but it's a good indicator of the students who are really engaged. So, yeah, we've got some good stuff from that. Now, moving on swiftly to how learning has changed. I'd just like to do something a little bit interactive at this point and ask this question. Should 7 to 8-year-olds, and I mean 7 to 8-year-olds, be required to learn their tables by rote? Let's have a hand show on this. I haven't got any zappers. Who says yes? Well over half. Who says a bit? And who says no? Almost no one. So we're all in favour then, are we, of that we've got to learn tables by rote. What for? What does learning them by rote for do? Why would we learn tables by rote as opposed to learning them as we actually want to use them? I remember I was very good at tables when I was a boy. I learned my tables, like all my stars, gold stars all the way down, because I wanted to be on that leaderboard. And I then forgot them all for the next 5 years until I was told to learn them again. And I got my stuff. Well, it wasn't stars anymore by then. I was a bit grown up by then. I learned them all again, passed my tests, and then forgot them all. And the time I actually really learned them was when I was doing my O-levels, and I had to do a lot of calculations. And then they just came naturally. I was using them, so I remembered them, and I learned the shapes and things. I didn't learn 1, 2 is 2, 2 2s are 4. I remembered the shapes of how things worked at that point. So I've never been convinced by this learning by rote, just for the sake of learning by rote. I'm not saying that tables aren't maybe useful, although in fact, of course, a lot of people would argue that tables aren't terribly useful these days because we've always got a calculator in our pockets. I've got 2 in my pocket at the moment, and I've got a computer. So we're probably, our young people at this moment quite a lot resent having to do some of this stuff that they have no idea what it is they're having to do it for. But you're typical of an audience of academics to say that they should learn tables by rote because there's a good reason to do this, isn't there? When it comes to remembering things and finding things out, of course, this generation have got Google, they've got Wikipedia, they've got YouTube, and they've got people. And it's this aspect that perhaps we all know that our students use Wikipedia and Google all the time. It's the first port of call for any question. But when it comes to working with other people, we perhaps don't realize the extent to which the sophisticated learner is making sure they've got a personal learning network, people that they can talk to, people when they tweet and say, does anyone know what to do, that someone will answer that tweet and tell them the answer. The lazy web. They'll have Facebook groups. I'm sure your students like ours have Facebook groups. in many ways, I despair of these Facebook groups because the students are behind a wall. We don't know what's going on there. They don't talk to us about it. And at the end of the year, they don't pass the information on to the next year. They move on with their Facebook group onto another year, and we don't pass information around. In some of the work on digital literacies, it was discovered that text was one of the most frequently used tools by students. And that turns out it's often just the text to a friend saying, where is the work we're meant to be doing, what time were we meant to hand it in, and that sort of thing. So I'd like to just say a little bit about the digital natives myth. I'm sure you've all seen that cartoon at some stage before. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. It's one of my absolute favourites because it has so many different interpretations. So the argument that was put about 10, maybe more years ago, was that there were that this generation, the Generation X, were coming along who had a different brain set. They had a different approach to learning, and these were the so-called qualities. Computers are not technology; they're just part of life. Actually, yeah. They tend to gravitate more towards collaborative than individual activity. They prefer a kind of trial and error approach to learning. They'll quite often have a Facebook window open while they're working. They'll quite often, although not as often as often stated, prefer typing to handwriting. They'll always be connected. They'll always have a device on somewhere, even in your lecture. They generally spend more time on the internet than they do watching TV, quite a lot more now. And they have absolutely zero tolerance for delays. They're not going to be going into the library asking for the interlibrary loans. If they can't get it there and then, they're going to not do it. And there's a lot of literature that came out about 10 years ago on this, and it's generally kind of discredited now. Although I don't think that kind of, those set of qualities, I think we'd probably recognize many of those qualities. But the thing that got discredited was that people started to believe that, therefore, this generation had some magical ability to use technology to do things that we didn't even know how to do, like learn. And that was an unreasonable assumption. And it turned out that when research was done into it in more detail, that often students themselves felt very threatened by this because they were expected to be able to use the technology in wonderful ways, and all they knew how to do was Facebook, which they did know how to do very well. And they were quite happy with turning a computer on and off and running Windows or their Mac operating system and so on, because they just saw computers as part of life. But they didn't necessarily know how to learn, and I certainly I got involved in a project about 6 years ago or something, doing benchmarking of the university, trying to look at what's actually really going on in the university. And when we asked our students what did they use technology for in learning, it definitely was the case with them. The most frequently used technology that they used was the text, to ask friends where the coursework was and so on, and then the VLE. I wanted to get onto the whole business of digital literacies. So it's a word that's going out of fashion at the moment, and people are talking about more about digital scholarships, because that's what universities like to hear about. But it is actually more than scholarship. We are quite used to teaching this bit, aren't we? Information literacy, ICT skills, that's usually in our curriculum somewhere. And the library are usually very happy to help provide such skills and so on. Finding, evaluating, processing, organizing, and so on. But actually, what I'm talking about is a lot more. It includes whole things like understanding media literacy, understanding your own identity and reputation online, and fostering that and looking after it. Being safe in the digital world. It's about understanding the affordances of technologies. And in particular, there's one bit of digital citizenship, contributing to the digital world. But there's one particular bit there that I wanted to pick up on because it's really important, which is this one about this kind of loop of communication, collaboration, social networking, networks of people. So the point is that it isn't all about pull, get, download. And it could be said that this is a kind of spectrum of digital literacy. The learner first starts by getting given stuff via the internet, and then at some stage they learn to go and find it for themselves. But then they get on to actually learning how to use people to get stuff from. And then, at some stage, they start to actually contribute stuff to the internet, the stuff they know. And then when they're doing that, they're really being part of the internet. They're part of the machine, if you like, when they start to actually contribute. And so I'm defining here digital literacy as the skills needed to live, learn, work, collaborate, influence, and lead in an increasingly virtual and digital world. I think we, as universities generally, are failing to address this big time. Our students are going to go out and work in a largely virtual world. Their teams are not going to be sitting in the office with them. They're going to be virtual teams spread out across the world. They're going to be in international organizations and so on. And if they don't understand how to influence and lead in those worlds, then they're missing out. Where do we teach that? So that's the end of my little rant, an aside, and we'll go back to kind of how learning is. The best learning happens where the students take control of their own learning environment, their personal learning environment. They don't, they're not just living with whatever we've given them in the VLE. So they manage their own learning, they set their own goals, they manage their own content, and they communicate and collaborate with other people, learners and microtutors. So I just a quick shoot through my own little experience here, my own moment of epiphany. This is quite a long time ago now. I decided that I was going to sign up for a course on wine appreciation. Those of you who know me will know that I enjoy the occasional glass of wine, and I wanted to understand it a bit more, so I signed up with the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, and I set off to do various courses with them. So this is their VLE. They give you lots of stuff on the VLE, and it's jolly good, and lots of interesting stuff. Typically, the past papers were the most useful thing. And sample tasting notes from the exams and so on, previous exams, so that you could go and check it out. But actually, what I was doing a whole load more stuff. So I was on Twitter. I was following various hashtags on Twitter. I had RSS feeds set up, posting me in all the latest stuff from the wine magazines. I was on Jancis Robinson's blog, responding to her comments from her. I was actually contributing to the Encyclopedia of Wine, which is like, kind of a Wikipedia sort of thing. I was putting my tasting notes up online and sharing them with people. I was following podcasts and podcasts. The Berry Brothers and Rudd had put up some things they called podcasts, and I was following all of these. So that was video, 2009. We were beginning to get streaming video by then. Berry Brothers and Rudd have a large educational site that was nothing to do with the course I was on, but it was very useful stuff. And I was bookmarking things in Delicious and trying to share them with my colleagues who just didn't get the hang of this at all. It was interesting that all of this stuff, the other people on my course really didn't get the hang of collaborating at this stage. They still were very much into learning as an individual activity. My point is, literacy in the virtual world is a complex thing, and we need to make sure that our curriculum actually gives our students the space and opportunities to develop this. Okay, so we're actually running a digital literacy, we call it an iChamps program at Southampton, and what we have done is we pay demonstrator rates to students and postgrads who wish to become iChamps, and what they do is they get attached to a class. So an academic comes along and says, I want to do something a bit kind of risky in my class today. I don't really know how to do this Twitter stuff or whatever. And we attach an iChamp to them, paying them demonstrator rates to do it. And they will actually deal with the technology for the academic so they can get on with their kind of key teaching thing. We've got about 20 of these people at the moment, expanding rapidly. But we're trying to get the faculties to take this over now rather than us do it from the centre. But yeah, so this is working well. So onto what's happening now, and I promised I would mention MOOCs. What's your position regarding MOOCs? A, what are they? B, pedagogically useless. C, I had a go at one or two. They're a useful addition, or I think they're bloody fantastic. Who's for A? A few, what are they? Right, I will answer the question. B, pedagogically useless? Oh, a surprisingly small number. Okay, I would have expected a larger number of that. I had a go at one or two, and I think they might be useful. Yeah, the majority of us are going for that. And addicts? Yeah, a few of us are addicts, yeah, okay. Okay, so MOOCs are massive open online courses, massive, typically tens of thousands of people on them, open in the sense that they are free and anyone can register for them. You don't have to have passed any prerequisite exams. They're online, and they're courses, and this is what made them a bit different to what had been happening before with open educational resources, that actually they run as a course. They start at a time, they finish at a time. Yeah, you can be late and keep on going at them after the course is officially finished. But the fact that they run at a particular time means there is a cohort of other people doing the course, and a lot of people get involved in talking to each other about the course, and it's that's possibly made them a bit different, sorry. So they're often short, 2 to 8 weeks typically requiring about 3 hours of work a week. And isn't this looking a bit like a television series? A television series usually requires 2 to 8 weeks and a few hours a week to do it. So it's actually not unrelated, because I believe that quite a few people who get involved in MOOCs are actually just doing edutainment. They're doing it because it's more interesting, more stimulating than watching the television series. No formal assessment and feedback. Actually, that's changing, rapidly changing. They mostly consist of watching videos, doing some very simple reading, not heavy academic papers, and some collaborative activities. And there was this thing called the Avalanche report that came out a while ago. It's interesting to note that the authors there, they all work for Pearson. And in it, they kind of put this view. This is the idea of disruptive technologies, that you've got a traditional business that's happily running, say, selling CDs or something like that. You know, you're happily selling CDs, expecting to sell a few more CDs each year. When someone goes and invents a new technology like MP3 or something, and then everyone's gone over to MP3, and before you know it, it's all, everyone's buying MP3s, and you've got the Napster moment, and your business model is dead. And what Pearson were trying to tell us is that MOOCs are the beginning of the end for us. The avalanche is coming, you're all going to be swept away because everyone's going to go over to MOOCs. And I think I hope, and I believe it was a pretty naive viewpoint, probably politically inspired by the fact that they wanted to get onto the so-called level playing field at the time. But I'd just like to say a little bit about our experience at Southampton, because we have invested quite a bit of time and effort in MOOCs at Southampton, and we've got quite a lot out of it. So in the first instance, we thought we were going into something that was a branding and recruitment exercise. We thought we were doing this to expand our brand, tell people how good we were at web science. We've got a ship parked outside our campus, so we do oceanography rather well. We wanted to tell people about that. And we've done 8 MOOCs in total. They've moved on. The later one, Developing Your Research Project, was aimed specifically at A-level students who do these EPQs, extended project, in the UK, in England, they do extended project qualifications. I don't know if you have equivalent in Scotland, which is a kind of extra thing they do alongside their A-levels to demonstrate they are kind of A-star candidates. And the teachers to some extent like this, but to some extent dread it, because if they've got a student who wants to do it, they've got a lot of extra effort to put in. They're not necessarily experts in teaching how to do a research project. So we did a MOOC to support the teachers and the students doing it. And it's gone down very well, and we've run it 3 times so far with lots of take-up. And of course the idea is that people will say what a wonderful place the University of Southampton is, and they will be pulled through from their informal learning through to doing something formal with us and signing up for our degrees. So that was the other bit. So that's what we thought we were doing. We thought we were going into this for brand and recruitment and so on. And no reason to suspect it hasn't been successful. And I could tell you 1 or 2 stories that demonstrate it has been. So one MOOC we ran on language learning recruited straight away 15 people onto an MSc in language learning, an online MSc, even before the MOOC had finished. They had to be starting on this course. And for next startup in September, we've already got 20 on it from that course, and I think there'll be a lot more. So we're definitely recruiting from this. But also, I managed to get the Vice-Chancellor to put this into his slide pack. We're actually trying to democratize education as well, give something away. But there's a lot of criticisms of MOOCs. The level of education, the age group. So they tend to be middle-aged people, and they all tend to have degrees already doing them. There's this enormous dropout rate, and how international is it really, and so on. All of these things seem to be changing rapidly under our feet. So the dropout rates we're understanding how to deal with that. We're getting a much larger international audience. We're getting a much more flat age profile of people from all ages and so on. So it is all changing, but that was the initial position. They got a lot of criticism. But probably the worst criticism they had was pedagogically simplistic. Do this, do this, do this. Well, isn't that just what I was criticizing in the VLE earlier? So here's week 1, week 2, week 3, just do this, watch this video, read this text. But actually, what was happening and the stuff that's going on underneath is there is a big back channel of people talking to each other using either the tool that's on the platform or indeed using Google Plus and Facebook or Twitter and so on. And we have actually done quite a lot of analysis of this. And that's where the learning is really going on. It's in the conversations and side channels that happen. And we're beginning to understand quite a lot about patterns for social learning, the ways of helping people to help each other. So this is a pattern where you take thousands of people, you split them off into little groups, and you get them to do something and evaluate another group something, and then go and talk about what they saw in the other group's things and so on. And there's lots of new patterns for people to help each other learn without actually having to have the academic fully involved. Another thing that's been good from MOOCs, from our point of view, is actually learning about how people learn. When we had 100 people doing things in the VLE, and one person said, I don't understand that, we didn't know how representative that was, and so on. We pretty much ignored it, I guess. Well, we helped that person, but we didn't understand that they were representing a bigger thing. When you've got 10,000 people, and 100 of them tell you that there is a problem, then you know you've got a problem. And I remember seeing one of my colleagues, the first time he realized this, he said, I've been teaching this way for ages, and no student has ever explained to me that this was a problem. But they always got their exams bad. And now I see what the problem is. You know, I can see it because I can see what's going on in the MOOC. This is the one that's really catching on for us, the embedded MOOC. We're running the MOOC for the public at the same time as using it as source material for our classes. So we're saying to a class, the textbook for this course is the MOOC. Go and do the MOOC, and in the meantime, we'll do some stuff on the side. So here is the MOOC with thousands of people on it, but here's our class, and we're doing some stuff on the side with them. We're doing some extra teaching with them, and then at the end, they get some proper assessment activities and so on, which we formally mark and so on. And that's really started to catch on. In fact, I have to say that every academic team of the 8 that have so far made MOOCs in our place, it's changed the culture in their department around them. It's had a corridor effect. They've all started to say, oh, you can really do stuff with a bit of video and a bit of online stuff, and then you can really use your class time so much more effectively. So we talk about the flipped MOOC. AT&T worked up with Georgia Institute of Technology to run a whole online masters in MOOC style. Initially, they said they were going to make it freely available to people who wouldn't get the qualification at the end of it, but it would be freely available. They went back on that, and in the end, you had to pay. But you had to pay, I think it was $7,000 for the course, whereas if you had done the whole thing at Georgia Tech, it would have been $55,000. My point here is that MOOCs are a phase on the way for us to understand how to do online learning better. We are doing online a lot better, and they're not displacing our place-based universities, they're just changing our behaviours in them. So summing up, I'd just like to put some thoughts in front of us. You don't have to answer them, but it's worth thinking if you have got answers for them. Why do we do transmission of information by lectures? Because it always seems that videos seem to be such a high-quality video seems to be so much better than me ranting up here. Are there better ways we could use our contact time? Would students learn better from us using our contact time differently? What is the educational benefit of students attending place-based universities? So, in a world where things are going more and more online, we better have a good answer for that. I'm sure we have got good answers for it, by the way, but we better have a good answer for it and not just do more of the same. Why are we doing closed book, handwritten examinations? The answer in my university turns out largely to be because we haven't got enough computers to do anything else, and we don't, and we're still not quite ready for the idea we could let them have an open computer exam. I have done quite a bit of experimenting with open computer exams, actually, and the results are fascinating. Another story. How are we preparing our students for the increasingly virtual workspace, the thing I pulled up on earlier? Because that's where they're going to go and be working, and are we doing anything to prepare them for it? So there may be some good answers, but we need to make sure we have them. So coming back to kind of summarizing how the web changes learning, it changes the way we learn. We're much more doing online. People are learning online much more. Video. I made the mistake the other day of actually saying to a class, oh, go and Google it. And they looked at me blankly and said, Google, Hugh? What's wrong with Google? Don't you use Google? No. YouTube. The YouTube is the search engine of choice. Independent learning, collaborative, open, informal learning are much more on the way. It changes what we learn, because facts are now just ubiquitous. You can get facts anywhere. And I'd like to just give you a little anecdote. I know I'm running out of time. My colleague Les Carr has an equivalent to the Turing test, as he calls it. It's right, I'm sitting in a meeting, I'm round a table, and someone starts to talk about something I know nothing about. I Google it, and if I join in that conversation and they didn't know I knew nothing about it, then effectively I knew it, didn't I? Because I'm just as good as if I had known it beforehand. The point, of course, is that you can't just Google anything and suddenly know it. The thing that Les is saying is I was round a table talking about things that are very close to what I already know about. I already have all the superstructure, and when I Googled it, it immediately fitted into the superstructure of stuff I had. And our job, of course, is about helping people to build that superstructure so that as they get new facts, they can fit them in and make them work. The more, I'm not going to go into this, I'll leave this to the psychologists to talk about, but maybe it changes actually how we learn. And people like Prensky and Nicholas Carr in The Shallows have talked about it actually changing the way the brain receives information. We have a much more shallow approach to lots of information rather than getting in deep into things. So the future of learning, there you go. Increased student engagement, flipped classroom, increased collaboration and open learning, more online learning, more emphasis on doing, making, creating, and less on imitating other people's work, less emphasis on remembering and knowing and more on knowing how to find out, and curriculum helping students to help to learn how to exist in a virtual world. And that final little quote, we are preparing students for jobs they don't yet exist, using work practices we don't yet know, supported by tools not yet invented. So that's what we've got to do. Sorry, I've gone 5 minutes over. Thank you.